Today I have the great pleasure of interviewing Renee Voyta, who's with First Savings Mortgage. Good morning, Renee.
Good morning.
Before we discuss your professional career, which is extensive, I know you knock out somewhere between $7 and $8 million every month, and one of the highest producers in the country. But before we get started, our listeners usually like to have a little a discussion about, where you came from and how you got into the business. So, did you grow up in the Washington area?
No, I grew up in Rhode Island. I came down to Washington to go to the University of Maryland, where I got a degree in finance.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went into commercial banking from there.
Where did you start commercial?
Madison National Bank.
Okay, yeah, sure. I'm very familiar with it and the history. I knew some of the people sat on the board, as a matter of fact. But we'll save that story for later. Anyway, how did you transition over into the mortgage side of the equation?
I wanted to get into sales, and I liked the banking side, so I had friends that were in the industry that told me, it was kind of a good combination of what I wanted to do with my banking background.
Mm-hmm. And so who did you start with?
Suburban Federal.
Okay, well, familiar with them too. And how long ago was that?
It was April of 1987.
1987. So you've been in business about 14 years as far as on our side of the fence. When you started off, did you primarily go after realtors? Did you go after CPAs? Or how did you get started?
I started off primarily going after realtors. I would say I didn't really get much business from CPAs until I started, doing some CPA loans, but that was probably a couple of years down the road.
Mm-hmm. And what was your approach? I mean, did you have any training, or did they just throw the book at you and say...
I actually did a whole month of training.
Really?
Which is very unusual.
Trust me, I've done a lot of interviews, and you may be the first.
I never processed, but I did a month of sales training. Now, if you remember, 1987 was when the rates were going nuts.
Yep, that's right.
Which was that week, so our training was a little bit behind in the sense of... they had to go deal with the market at that point, too. But, yeah, we had a whole month of training, and then I had a loan officer take me out on the street for a little bit. And then I went out, then they just kind of threw me out from that point.
Mm-hmm. When you went out, did you just, how did you actually get started? Could you pick any territory you wanted? Did you have, pretty much your run of things?
There wasn't a big company, and there weren't a lot of originators, so I picked, which is probably still the area that I'm doing now, is Bethesda, Upper Northwest D.C.
Mm-hmm. Which, for our listeners, is kind of the high price spread. I would say what the average loan amount is, running about $250 in that area?
In that range. I think at that point I might have also tried Gaithersburg, which is a lower end, but the agents were very different than they were in D.C. Right.
They're totally different cultures up there, actually.
So I couldn't, D.C. works much better for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, were you working along Connecticut, Wisconsin Avenue, those corridors?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. How many realtors did you have when you started out?
Not that many. Those first year, probably 6 or something. It wasn't a lot.
So you just concentrated on a few realtors.
I went out to see a lot of them. I just didn't get business from a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the way the deal works,
I went out to see a lot of them. I actually got very lucky with a friend asked a friend to help me out, a realtor who I still do a lot of business. Probably one of my number one realtors.
Really? After all this time?
Yep, still doing business with her. And she's a very good friend. Has become a very good friend, too.
What advice would you have, because the listeners out here in the audience are going to range from loan officers who are just starting off that have relatively little experience, and this is where the target question is. What advice would you have to people that are just starting off that maybe have 2 or 3 months and kind of getting thrown to the wolves when dealing with realtors?
You've got to try to let them see you, but not too much. So, you're not being a pest. I think that you need to try to figure out what can differentiate you from your competition, what program that you might have that differentiates you, that you can offer. Because if someone's been using me, say, for the last 10 years, and you want to get business from me, you've got to come up with a reason to be able to figure out what they can do. What you can do that I can't offer.
Mm-hmm. Which is the same thing when you started. I think a lot of people seem to forget that when you started, you were going up against established people that had relationships too.
Right. That's very true. And I think that when I started, it was a little easier because loan officers hadn't been out to see realtors a lot because of the refi market.
Well, when you started, were you in a refi market?
No, it was at the end. Rates jumped from 8.5 to 10 that week.
The week you started?
The week I started.
Congratulations on your timing.
So the first 6 months were a struggle.
Did you think of quitting?
No. I hadn't been making very much in commercial lending, so it wasn't a struggle on the income, not to have a lot of loans. And then I went to a company that was coming into the market and was buying the market a little bit.
Who was that?
National First.
Doesn't ring a bell.
No, they're not around anymore.
What did they have, a special, like a 1-year arm or something?
They had a 30-year jumbo special. And all of a sudden I went from doing nothing to originating $3 million in a month.
Which probably made you real happy. But kind of back on message here, in terms of new loan officers out there, what specific advice would you have for them beyond what you've said?
Very specifically, return phone calls. I think that is probably the most important thing that I do. And
even today? Even
today. I think that if I don't return the phone calls in a timely manner, I can lose a deal. Or, my agents know that they can get me quickly. I think that's important for them.
Mm-hmm. I think I can verify that. You and I chatted a couple times. I always do with everybody, and you're very accessible. And if you're accessible for someone like me that's not bringing bucks to the table, I suspect you're very accessible to your clients.
I think if you look at, if I'm not going to be around, they might need to call the new loan officer because he might be available, and they realize, they need an answer. And if I don't call them back, somebody else is, they're going to call somebody else because they need that answer.
What about rate sheets for new people? How do you feel about those?
There is some importance of realtors knowing where the rates are, but I think that more importantly, and I do Friday rates with, so people have rates for the weekend, but I feel more importantly you should highlight your programs.
As opposed to pricing.
As opposed to pricing. You've got to do some pricing so they have an idea, A, if you're competitive, but B, most importantly, if a realtor goes to write a contract on Saturday, you don't want them calling you just to find out a quote. Saves you some time.
So your emphasis would be on distributing programs that differentiate yourself.
Right.
What about getting into the office for new people? And we're going to jump up to, a higher level here in a little bit, at the level that you're dealing with. But in the meantime, what hints would you have, for example, with dealing people at the front desk, and in particular dealing with that office manager, which can help you or kill you?
Yeah, it's harder now than it's ever been because of all the in-house mortgage companies. The doors are shut. Even to me, sometimes I can't go beyond a front desk.
Really?
Offices. I mean, I can ask for individual agents, but if I don't ask for the individual agents, I can no longer just walk through the door.
And do you, normally don't interrupt, but I find this not necessarily fascinating in the sense that I'm shocked to hear this, but the fact that you say that this is much more commonplace today. How do people get around that? You obviously know a lot of agents, so you can throw a couple names out.
Yeah, somebody new I would suggest doing. I used to do this when I started, and every once in a while I still do it, is stopping by an open house on a weekend. It's hard now because they're busier than they might be, but just stop in maybe at the beginning or at the end to meet the realtor if you can't get through the door. And then maybe you can go back and follow up with something for them and actually ask for them in the office.
Mm-hmm.
But it usually helps to be able to. And if it happens to be a slow open house, they actually are bored and you have their undivided attention because they have nothing else to do.
Do you ever bring any comparison sheets or stuff on the job or donuts or anything special?
I usually only bring comparison sheets when I am asked to do them. I don't randomly do them for people I don't know.
But I think for that new person out there.
For the new person, yeah, you could bring in the problem. You won't know that you'd have to get someone to look up tax numbers for you. But I used to bring donuts. I think it's easier to get into an office, say sometimes on a Saturday morning.
It's a good tip. Of all the interviews I've done, no one's mentioned that.
Yeah, because the managers aren't necessarily there, so the office is more laid back. I haven't done it in a while.
Yeah, we don't have to anymore. We're passing on your knowledge.
When I go to an open house now, it's usually to show my son or something.
What about getting back to dealing for people that are, when I say new, I mean, people even that have a year and a half experience facing these challenges. What about dealing with the branch managers that run these real estate shops now? Is it important to establish a relationship? And
it's very important, and the better your relationship is, the more business you're going to do in that office. Because if you offer to do new agent training and they don't have an in-house loan officer in there, you're going to get in with the new people right from the start, and it makes a big difference. What you, again, sort of need to get the manager is what you can do for her to make her life easier, in terms of helping with new agent training, helping with updating, or teaching her agents. We don't do a lot of FHA and VA in this area.
No, I know.
But when there are FHA changes that will enable people to do more business, giving them updates. I have a couple managers that, when we get new guidelines, I automatically call them and go over it with them. So I think it's important if you're the one keeping them updated on those changes.
Are you on a first-name basis with the managers that you deal with?
Yes.
At this point?
Yeah.
What else would you recommend that people do? I tell you where I'm coming from. I think one of the hardest things is, and I think you're right on the button here, is gaining access. That it is so difficult to gain access to these agents. I mean, just to getting back to meet some of them today, you get that iron fence up there.
If you can talk to the manager and do a sales meeting, that's your best bet in terms of exposure. Because usually it's saying, okay, the manager's saying, okay, I support this person enough to let them come in the office and talk. And whether you're talking about an industry change or a specific new program that you might have or some niche type product that you have, it's going to get you in front of those agents and give you a chance to meet them. And you'll be more apt to get phone calls and have a reason to get back behind the door, behind the front desk, if they've met you before. And if they have a face, with the name, I think you're going to be called a lot more often.
When you're dealing with people, do you have a database system that you use?
For realtors?
To keep in touch with your clients and not just realtors.
For my customers, yeah. I have just for the last 8 years. I wasn't doing it the beginning part. I have all my clients on base, and they get 2 big mailings a year from me. And then...
Are you using ACT?
No, I'm not. It's just on Word. The receptionist. I hand it to her, and she kind of does it. So, but I do mail them out Christmas cards, and then usually another mailing.
Do you do an actual newsletter, or do you just send a Christmas card and then some general information? Is it structured? Or?
The other one, the Christmas card is not structured. The Christmas card is just a Christmas card, and then on the other one, I usually will do highlights of, if there's some new change or something like that. It's more of a personal letter to the customer than it is an actual newsletter. I find it's just bulleted with 5 items that I might want to get across to them.
Do you get business from it?
Yes, I do, every single year.
Every single year?
And I still, because what I'm sending out is magnets, and they stick them on the refrigerator, and I still have customers tell me it was really easy to find my number because they have the magnets.
There is not an interview that I do, and I only interview people that are pretty high level, where something new doesn't come up. In this particular case, I cannot even begin to tell you in the interviews that I have done of the people that talk about giving out magnets for refrigerators, and how much, more importantly, how much business that brings them. This little thing that brings such an enormous quantity of business.
It's amazing, and the cost is very low. It's probably $200 a year.
To do that.
Not counting the postage.
That's amazing. That's like a fifth of a deal.
So, no, it works really well, and I just have a call this morning from a previous customer, and he said the same thing. So.
It's just amazing. I probably have 10 interviews where people have, without any prompting whatsoever, have mentioned that. Do you have any other tricks that you use, and maybe that's not the right word to use, but any other vehicles you have to keep in touch with your realtors in particular?
My realtors, I fax to my bulk of my realtors every week. Usually it's Friday, and usually it's rates with new programs highlighted. if we get a great new program, I'll do a separate fax, on the new program. And then I still try once a week to get out to see the bulk of my realtors.
Do you pick and we'll get into time management a little bit later, but do you pick a specific day, or are you structured that way?
It's usually Wednesdays or Fridays, depending. It just works on my schedule. It's not a very specific day.
Do you believe that what I call face time is important in the business,
yes,
even for someone, at your level?
I think it's very important. I find that the people that used to do a lot of business when I started, some of them are still doing it, some of them aren't because the realtors never see them anymore. And I think it's important for them to physically see you. Not all of them. There's certain ones that you'll find that don't care. There's certain ones now that are working out of their house, and it's hard to physically see.
Well, that was going to lead me into my next question. When you do that, just by kind of mathematical definition, there's going to be a lot of people that you're going to miss that are clients or have given you loans or you would like to do loans with. Do you call them, or how do you?
If I haven't heard from them in a little bit, I'll call them. Or there's one particular I'm going to call next week and see if she's hard to see when you go down to the office. She's out a lot. Just make a lunch meeting with her. You just take her to lunch.
Do you do that a lot? Lunches and breakfast, or?
I don't do breakfast. I'm not a morning person. I do lunches. Not a lot. Well, it depends how busy, and if a lot of my realtors are very busy, and taking the time out for lunch is not something they do very often.
Well, I think your point that you're dead on when it comes to not abusing the privilege of access to a realtor. Not trying to preach here, but I am condensing some other interviews of people that at your level, and they pretty much all emphasize the fact that it's one thing to have access to a realtor, but it's quite another thing to abuse it, where you're going in without a reason just to see somebody and shake their hand. It actually can be very counterproductive.
So I usually try to, sometimes they just want to see, they just want to talk. Other times you have something to say, new programs or something. It's much nicer to go out if you had new programs all the time, but that doesn't happen.
Well, it leads me into another area. I don't talk about it on every interview. In fact, very few of them. But I do like to talk about it occasionally, and that's pricing. And I wondered if just conceptually you would discuss how you feel about pricing. And I'm not looking for anything proprietary to your company, but do you have to be in the market? Do you emphasize pricing? You don't? Is it important in the scheme of things?
Obviously, you have to work for a company that's competitive. You're never going to be, unless you have complete control, ever going to be the lowest on the street. So I think, it sounds like a line. I've heard it from my management for a long time, but you have to try to sell your service. But you also have to be, someone's not going to use you if you're 0.5% higher. So.
Where do you think in the scheme of things? I used to always say when I was on the street, which admittedly a long time ago, that if you were within 1/8% or 1/4 point, then when I was managing, I didn't even want to hear anything about pricing. But at the same time, you do have to be within a certain competitive level.
Yeah, usually you have to be within about 1/8 to sometimes 1/4. It just depends on how difficult the deal is. If you're a little bit higher, but the loan's really difficult, and that you're going to be able to get it through, and your competition might not be able to get it through, then it's not as much of an issue.
Are you starting to get people, because you deal with a very sophisticated clientele, because I know your market area, are you starting to get into some areas now where people are using the Internet, if not necessarily for loans, although I'm sure you probably lost a loan here and there to the Internet, but as a knowledge base?
As a what?
A knowledge base, where they're going into the Internet to check rates.
Yes. I had someone do it yesterday.
Really?
Not a lot, but they are doing it. They just want to see if we're competitive with the Internet. Usually, I rarely lose a loan to them. Usually, the Internet is not as low right now. It's just people think I haven't had much of a problem with people going there. I think that more of a problem would be your very small brokers that advertise in the paper on a weekly basis with much lower rates than if you look at, say, the top the Washington Post has a list with the top 20 lenders, and then it's got a list of some of the small brokers that advertise to pay to get in that. And you look at the rate differential between the two charts, and it's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, but I know, to be a devil's advocate a little bit on this, that those rates that go in the Post, and by extension other newspapers across the country that do the same sort of thing, a lot of those things have to be phoned in by secretaries or whatever the contact point is sometime on Thursday.
Right, no, I know that's true with ours too.
And so what happens is you have people that are lowballing. They get in there and they'll, knock it down an eighth. And gee, if you'd called me that, when I called in, we did have that rate.
That's true, but I'm saying when they call, some of them are one-man shops, that completely control their profit margin. So I think that's actually a little harder to deal with than the internet. Most companies on the internet are
that's kind of an interesting take. I know your shop. We haven't talked about your company, and we normally don't get into any depth about it, but I know it was either in the Washington Business Journal, I think it was last year, you were the #2 office in the whole metropolitan area in terms of production, so you are a major shop, and this is locally owned, too.
We're locally owned.
Yeah, right. I know your owner. Which I find very interesting. But you also have a very, very good name. You have a lot of heavy producers. I know Danny Chappelle works over there, and you have a first-rate name, which I think probably helps you out on the street.
Right. I've been here though before we had much of a name, but it does help us. It's also, I think, the difference between, and I think this is where, if someone's looking at picking a company, is that we've got, I think part of the reason we're doing the numbers is we've got some very flexible, unique programs. President of our company comes up with programs versus, following, not necessarily following the whole industry. So I think that helps if someone's listening to this and looking at, a company.
Well, what would you, that's not the first time that's come up when people start talking about selecting a company. Rarely does price come into the equation other than you want to pick a shop that's obviously competitive. But essentially you all are really, when you bottom line it as brokers, I don't think you do a lot of servicing. Probably sell your servicing off.
Most of it.
I would think. But I do think that's rather interesting that you come up with unique programs in a marketplace because program differentiation seems to play a pretty prominent role today. And I wonder if you give some examples in your market of the type of products that you would say would differentiate yourself from your competition in a generic sense, maybe.
A while ago, when I first got here, we were one of the only ones doing an 80-15-5. That has changed, but we still, I think, are one of the only ones that can do an 80-15 to a 50 back ratio, to a 50 qualifying rate. Recently, they introduced an interest-only 5-year adjustable that has no negative amortization that also goes to a 45 back ratio. So
and what does it recast itself after 5 years?
Yeah, it becomes a 1-year adjustable.
Okay, it becomes a 1 year.
Yeah, but it gives, in a higher interest rate market, though these aren't really that high, it allows somebody to get into that house they might have been looking at, a year ago, or with prices going up, still able to afford that house.
What, because no MI?
There's no MI, but they're also, when you only have to pay interest,
sure,
monthly savings is lower. So that's...
But there's still a 30-year AM, I would think,
no,
right?
It's interest only.
Oh, it's in, but when it recasts, you go into...
When it recasts, but you qualify, and for the first 5 years, it's interest only.
Oh, and that's the qualifying rate. Okay, so now I understand exactly what you're saying.
It enables us to get more people in. High ratio programs where people can go to a 75% ratio with 10% down will be another niche product. Some of our 100% financing. And those are the type of products that when we're talking about rate sheets, those are the type of products I go out with. I don't go out with my 5-year arm for the day, because it's really not any different than my competitors. One
of the complaints that you kind of actually hear it more on the realtor side, and that is that I know when I lived in Great Falls, Virginia for many years, and you know that market area, and some of those offices out there, literally you'd have a loan officer come in, and 10 minutes later another loan officer would come in, and then it was almost it's just like a train.
don't think you're seeing the quantity. I haven't seen a competitor when I've been out lately at all.
Really? See, in Great Falls, it's crazy because the loan amounts are, you know, $400,000 or $500,000 out there.
Right. I think that, you know, you don't see. First of all, if you're not allowed, certain ones, people are not allowed back in certain offices, so they can't spend the time. So you don't necessarily, the realtors aren't bothered by them. So I think that you're not seeing the quantity of loan officers you used to see.
Just because of that.
Right, and I think I think this market might be getting some people out of the business. I'm not sure, but
Well, it is. I actually, according to Tom LaMalfa, who owns Wholesale Access, they're looking for a drop off of probably 25% in companies by the end of the year 2000, which probably started sometime last year too. So, you know, you've been around a long time, and I have a little longer. And, you know, this is a very cyclical business by the nature of the beast. You missed maybe some of the Jimmy Carter years that were so much fun, where interest rates, the VA and literally the VA and FHA rate, I believe it was either 18 or 19%. And in fact, I was telling a story on tape not too long ago, where the rates got so high, and they thought that if it went to 20%, he was forced to raise it. That politically it would be a death knell. Proved he had a death knell anyway on getting reelected, but it reached a point where it was like 19% in 12 points, because they didn't politically want to raise it to that magic 20% level. So any of us that have worked through some of these cycles know that it gets a lot of people out of the business, which I don't think is necessarily unhealthy.
Right. No, I think that there's still. I don't think you're not going to lose your top 20 probably. No.
Let me ask you something. This is an increasing phenomenon where you're finding realtor companies. I know Long & Foster in your area with Prosperity Mortgage, where you're finding a lot of realtors are setting up mortgage affiliates now. Are you running into a problem with that? And I think you know what I mean, where they're really trying to steer business to, have the agents steer business to them.
Yeah, I mean, my business with Long & Foster has definitely gone down, where one of my offices I barely go to, because they have a very good, it depends on the quality of the loan officer that they have, but in that particular case, they have a very good loan officer.
Mm-hmm.
And it is definitely more difficult. I think what you have to do is, again, go back to a niche product that they don't have. I actually get referrals from a Prosperity loan officer, probably more than I do from agents in the office now of stuff that she's not able to do.
So you would recommend people that are facing that obstacle, maybe even befriend that person?
Yeah, if you befriend that person, it's actually very good, because they see every loan officer that comes in the door, and you kind of get an idea of what your competition's doing. They usually, depending on the person, if they're a friendly person, they usually talk to most of the people that are coming in the door. But if you give them an idea of what you can't do, they want to help the agent out a little bit. So if they can't do it, they want to be able to say, this is where you should go, because they look good doing that. So I have, found that I get referrals from other mortgage companies, not just Prosperity, even just some of my competitors, of stuff that we're able to do.
Mm-hmm. You're an established loan officer now, and for those people that are at your level, how do you conduct your business day? And by that I mean, because you do so much volume, do you take your loan applications face-to-face?
I don't take all of them face-to-face. I take a fair amount over the phone, by fax, by internet now. I do take some. I usually give the customer the option. A lot of my customers, again, are really extremely busy at work and would rather just spend 15 minutes on the phone than actually sit down with me face-to-face. So I give the customer the option of which way they'd rather do it.
Do you go to closings?
I go to some, not all of them. I don't think I physically could go to all of them and still have time to do everything else.
Mm-hmm. What about when you're starting out, though?
When you're starting out, I would definitely recommend going to closings, because you're meeting an agent. You obviously have a referral from one agent, but you're meeting the other agent on the other side.
Did that ever result in you getting business?
Yes, definitely. It's definitely a good way to get business, and it's also resulted in me all of a sudden having a new competition with an agent. I'm like, where'd they come up with that? It's from from someone needing someone at closing. They did a good job on one of their listings.
It's usually after 13 years now. If you had to break your business down, how much is coming from directly from realtors right now, and how much is coming from just referrals from your database?
I would say probably 75% is still from realtors.
It's still from realtors? Maybe
not. Well, it's hard because some of my customers go back to the same realtor, or a lot of them are going back to the same realtor. So when I have to put my source in the computer, it comes back to the realtor, so it might not be quite that high, but it's probably fairly close. But it's still a lot of repeat customers.
The repeat customers are they just call you directly.
Right.
Do you ever have opportunities to refer clients back to realtors to give realtors business?
Yep, I do. And I try to rotate who I'm going to give it back to.
What about in terms of, I'd like to change a little bit, in terms of when you're dealing with your clients now, are you getting them fully qualified up front?
Yeah.
Sending them through DU? And
depends on the case. If the case is very easy, I won't send them through DU until they're ready. If the case is, we're going to do it regardless of whether it goes through DU. If it's something a little bit unusual that I need to know, then we'll put it through DU up front.
What about on self-employed? Do you get a lot of self-employed people?
Yes, a lot.
And how do you deal with that? Because that's obviously a much more complex issue, especially when you're using DU. And
yeah, it depends on. Some of them are pretty straightforward. Usually, if I have any questions, the underwriter will review it for me up front. But I do have everybody, as much as possible, pre-approved prior to writing contract. They have to be in this market down here. To actually, most people are multiple bid offers, and to be able to get the contract, if they don't have a pre-approval, they're not going to be competitive.
They don't even have a chance.
Most of the time, they're not going to be competitive. And I find at times that I have more than one customer writing on the same property.
Most of the people that you're getting these pre-approval, are they eventually finding something in this market?
Some are. Some are still, I've got some, I think I'm going on a year and they haven't found anything yet. But most people are, eventually finding something.
Do you do any new homes business with builders?
I have a new home subdivision and a condominium project, a couple condo projects.
Really?
So.
How about discussing that? That's always an area that interests our listeners.
The new home one is kind of a corporate thing. I was given one subdivision. It's not a lot. It's probably like 2 to 3 loans a month. And I just go out there one night. It's actually a little more difficult because the customers are forced to use you versus picking you.
Like because the builder's paying a certain amount of closing costs?
In this case, the builder's paying closing costs. So it's a little bit harder because I'm not used to customers having much less trust in me. And it's far away from my normal work area. So it's not, my reputation doesn't go up there.
What do you do, out in the Gaithersburg area?
Germantown.
Up in Germantown, too. For those listeners out there, it's a bit of a haul.
So it's just a little different than what I'm used to. The realtors don't know who I am. It's a little bit different. And then I knew condo project where they give very little to use me. But I have a developer that I do all their projects. And that was mainly just, it was a realtor I did business with, and he started selling them for them. And we still, we contact the developer a lot. I have to go down and see them a lot. We do a lot of favors, not favors. We take them, I make sure not only do I see the salespeople, but I see, the president of the company and keep in touch with everybody.
You seem to indicate on that project that the developer is not paying a lot of closing costs.
I think one of the ones is paying $750 to use it.
Yeah, that's nothing.
So
for that, you're not necessarily going to get a deal.
No, but I find that I still get a fair amount because that's who people aren't necessarily going to shop as much because they're not kind of that Fannie Mae guides. So it makes it a little bit easier.
And so you have products that fit in that niche?
We have products that fit in the niche.
Which is, so you don't need, for example, a certain amount of 50% pre-sales. And
so the developer would, prefer. I'm trying to get them to give more money towards this, but haven't gotten there yet.
Where's your condo project located?
They're all in D.C. There's 3 going on right now in D.C.
Really? Yeah, DC's a pretty hot market for those.
One of them, I mean, I've been taking the loans, but they're not going to close till, I think, spring of 2001, so.
Well, many, many years ago, probably before you were born, I sold the first condominium conversion ever in Washington, D.C. That was a used condo. It was Woodley Park Towers.
Oh, I know exactly
Yeah, right across from the zoo. Well, I sold George General Patton lived in there, and Lyndon Johnson. You know, a high price was $39,000 for some of those. It was quite a different world, you know, than today. Let me ask you something. Do you actively court CPAs and attorneys and people that I would call kind of outside the box?
I actively court the ones that I have I don't go out and seek new ones, but I do get referrals from my own CPA and some CPAs whose loans I've done in the past.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's a good avenue for people?
Yeah, I think it is. I don't think they control it as, I think actually stockbrokers probably have a little more control necessarily than a CPA does, because they're calling them to talk about their money versus people only see their CPAs usually once a year.
Do you know what I tell people? I say it in the interviews, but I have never, ever done an interview, and I've done tons of them, where somebody didn't come up with something unique. Never. And that's your unique one. No one has ever discussed in any of the interviews going after stockbrokers, and I like that a lot. Wondered maybe if you
100% financing programs.
Pardon me?
If you have programs where they have to put very little money down, your stockbrokers don't want the people to take all the money out of their accounts. So they'll be very happy to refer you business, you know, so someone can get in with minimal cash.
That's an awesome, I swear, which is the first bad word I've ever used in an interview. That's an incredible idea. I mean, I really like it.
So, I mean, some of them have their own mortgage companies. Actually, both my stockbrokers do, and they still refer business to me. But, you know, some of them do have their own, but I do get a fair amount of referrals from brokers. As do I know some of my colleagues at work.
Do you know what? I would think for the listeners out there, for new loan officers and for those that are more experienced, I would suspect that is a great untapped well of sources out there. And I like how you've combined that with the fact of going in with programs where you know, you're talking 100% financing or whatever it is, minimal cash, because as you say in that business, and especially where people are working on margin and everything, preserving cash is the name of the game from their side of the equation.
Right. Yeah, that's the way they want. That's when we came out with our 100% program. It was geared towards, you know, that was actually came from our president was, you know, tell your brokers about it. And most people have a broker. I mean, not as much anymore because people use online. But a lot of people have their own broker that you can just approach. So it makes it a little easy to start off.
I think today in today's environment, it's much harder, unless you're established like you are, it's much harder to get business. And I think people that, not to preach, but that focus just on realtors and neglect going after certified financial planners and CPAs and other avenues, I think they're cheating themselves.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that you're seeing a lot of for sale by owners, at least in our marketplace, because houses are selling so quickly, people aren't using realtors. So settlement attorneys is another one where I get referrals from.
I'd like to go back and talk about FSBOs. What is your marketing approach to getting some of those people, or what kind of advice would you have? Because you're right, when you're selling, when you can sell a $500,000 home by putting a sign on a tree outside your property almost, you know, there's a 6% being saved there, and there are a lot more FSBOs today. I
don't market it as much as I probably should. I know there is, you know, you can send information to them, offer to help, you know, with the financing. What I'm finding more is I have previous customers going in to do FSBOs than anything else. Or they're contacting a settlement attorney to help them write the contract, and I'm getting a referral from the settlement attorney.
From the settlement attorney. Mm-hmm.
So, and they're usually you know, pretty trustworthy if they've picked a settlement, you know, company and they've helped them with the contract. So.
I saw some, I talked to some people not that long ago that were getting business from some areas that you would not normally think from, you know, being in soccer leagues and Boy Scouts and just all these alternative areas outside of the realtor box.
Right. I mean, I'm getting, you know, my son's only a year and a half, so we're not quite at that level yet.
Your babysitter, maybe.
I've gotten a little from playgroup, you know, from people I've met through him, you know, just personal new contacts. We haven't gotten. It's a little too young for that stage yet.
Let me ask you: Do you in your type of relationship selling, which is what you do you develop social relationships, or do you try to keep it on a professional level? Or
no, I develop social relationships. I had realtors when I got married a couple of years ago. They made a bridal shower for me. I have definitely. Some of them we go out with, you know, with my husband. Most of my top realtors, with the exception of a couple my husband has met, gone out with. I think it's important. It makes them, I think, a little more loyal. Besides the fact that I usually like their company.
Sure.
I don't. Either the ones he hasn't met is usually either because they're too far away, or, you know, it just he would. But I think it makes a big difference.
When you you know, when I was doing business, I used to, you know, at some point before, probably right around your time, they started to kind of mandate that 3 names be giving out just to protect themselves legally. Before that, you know, anything went. But I'm assuming that you're looking for what I used to call that first call.
Right.
You know, you don't want to be number 2 or 3 on their. You don't mind being on their list. You just don't want to be. Now you get the second or third call.
Right. You want to be number 1. You want to be, and a lot of times if you've done, and I don't necessarily love doing realtors on loans because they're not always the easiest thing in the world, but sometimes if you have and they can say, I have a good realtor, well, here's my 3 names, but this is who I personally have used. That speaks a lot for itself.
Yeah, it does, and I think that's we've discussed this in the previous interviews that, and for those listeners out there, the new loan officers in particular, that when you do that, a lot of people get kind of turned off on the fact that they're giving 3 names out, but the fact is that even though it's not a legal thing, the realtors have mandated that. That's where that rule is coming from. To protect themselves, but most realtors, if you have a good relationship, you know, they're going to give those 3 names out, but they're going to turn and say, you know, but I really like Renee. You know, that there's going to be some wink or nod or whatever, and you know, you're going to get that first call.
Right, and I think that makes a big difference.
Do you give any seminars or training? Do you do anything?
I used to more so than I have lately, because a lot of them can't have you give training if they have an in-house mortgage company. They're supposed to use the in-house people for the training.
And yet you and I know the legal reality is that they really are not supposed to do that at all, that it really becomes forms of steering. But there's enormous pressure. Having said that, there's enormous pressure out there. And this I do think is new for that it definitely has changed the equation in the last 7 or 8 years. Of realtors having their own mortgage companies. The pressure, and I'm thinking of a specific company that's very large that I know very well, and all the players, they're under enormous pressure to produce loans for the mortgage company.
Right. So it's harder. I do some, you know, we get new programs. I don't do it as much as I used to. I probably should, and I always say I'm going to, but, you know, it's hard when you're busy to find, you know, when it slows down, of course, is when you want to do it.
What about, how about talking a little bit about your personal infrastructure? Once again, I'm not looking for anything proprietary, but how do you run your office team? For example, at your level, do you have an assistant that you have help you? Do you, you know, have... do you rely on a prime processor that you've had?
I have my own processor. I did not have an assistant. Except
but she is dedicated to you.
Right, she's dedicated to me. I did when I went on maternity leave a year and a half ago, but I didn't, you know, that was for that period of time. go back and forth with doing that, but I haven't made that decision. But I do have my own processor. So she does do, probably above and beyond what most processors do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she's fabulous, and that helps me be able to do what the numbers that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Do you recommend that people take care of, and I definitely do not want to know exactly how you take care of your processor, but do you recommend that loan officers out there take care of the processor in some manner, whether it's a dinner or a ball game or whatever?
Definitely, because they see, they have an idea of what you're making on each deal.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you look at their salary, it gives them the busier you are, if they're getting some incentive there, I think it just helps them.
Do you have a good relationship with your processor?
I have a great relationship with my processor.
So you depend on her?
Yeah, heavily.
When you say heavily, does your processor get in touch with your clients on updating, on a status, let's say on Fridays, or do you have some system in place?
She'll do it when they're approved, or I'll do it. It depends on what day of the week someone might be approved, and whether I'm here or out seeing customers. And it depends how swamped she is in terms of how many phone calls, that I have her make. But she does, call customers with conditions, take care of all that. And she will update the agents. And the agents know her and feel free to call her when they, when they need to.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you something to get back to you for a moment. With the kind of volumes that you bring in, you're obviously very busy and get a lot of phone calls. How do you manage your time, and in particular, how do you manage stress? Because we're in the business of chaos and stress, and I'm just curious how you kind of manage it. The reason I'm interested is that the tonality of your voice is very kind of calm and soothing, and very unstressed. Maybe you'll get stressed when you hang up and the calls come in, but really, you're very kind of calm and collected.
I think that you just have to realize that you just get all done. I'm actually someone who can get a fair amount done on a timely basis. I have pretty much managed my time. I've gone from, I used to have more time in the office to chit-chat. Now I kind of, I still have lunch with my friends in the office, but I spend more time in my office just getting my stuff done than socializing, so that I would rather get home and see my son. So I think it's just a matter of, staying focused, not wasting a lot of time. If I could do a loan app over the phone instead of driving to Capitol Hill, which takes me 45 minutes each way to get back and forth, I've just saved an hour and a half of my day that I can, either go out and make sales calls or get home early to give my child dinner. So I think that, just doing as much as I can with what I have available, on the computer, I think really helps.
Do you use a laptop?
Yes, I do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't take all my loan apps on a laptop.
That's where I was coming. You're ahead of me.
Because it takes me a lot longer.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take it over the phone, I'll enter it on the laptop, but I won't necessarily sit in front of a customer with the laptop.
A lot of people that I talk to, they on purpose will not take it on a laptop, even though they may bring one in or keep it out in their car, for the simple reason that they like that interaction of writing something down and looking somebody, in the eyes, and they feel it's a much more personal process than typing while they're talking, so to speak.
It's also, you also have to, it's easier. I mean, if I have a lot of the information up front, then I'll put it in the laptop. But I also, the portable printer is really slow, so I don't love carrying it around with me. So. Do
you have a little printer along so you can print out all your?
I do, but I don't necessarily always do it. A lot of times I just have my processor send out disclosures.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do a closing cost estimate on site, and then the truth in money and stuff I'll just have her mail right back out.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I have the information before, I'll have it printed before I meet the customer.
Since you have a young child, I'm assuming you first child?
Yes.
Obviously, at that age, they need a lot of attention. So I guess my next question is for those mothers and fathers out there that have young children, how do you get quality time on the home side?
I actually find I manage it pretty well. I work from home on Thursdays.
Uh-huh.
So in the middle of the day, I take a break and then go out and play with him. Another day during the week, instead of really eating lunch, I run out and do a gym class with him. Which is an 18-month-old can do a gym class. So I do feel like I get, some quality time with him.
What about nights? Do you take low naps at night?
I try not to. I always try to get home so I can put him to bed at least. Or sometimes I'll go home and then come back, so that I've seen him for dinner.
So you try not to do a lot of nighttime work?
If I do nighttime work, I try to do it no later than, 7 or 6. Actually, I try to do it no later than 6:30 if possible, so that I'm home to put him to bed, so that I can do story time and, I can do our little nighttime ritual.
Right, exactly. What about on weekends? Do you do a lot of weekend work?
I will do like a weekend low nap, usually 1 to 2. I'd rather do that, take 2 hours, and I'll try to sometimes schedule it around nap time, so he's down napping. And I'd rather do that than stay, 2 nights during the week. Because if I'm with him all day Saturday and all day Sunday and I take a couple hours out in the middle of that, I don't feel like it takes as much time away from him as if I go a whole day and I don't necessarily see him.
Mm-hmm. Do you have kind of a tech bent in a sense that you have all the gadgets and the cell phones and the pagers? What kind of internal system do you use to keep in touch with your people?
In terms of...
Well, do you have a voicemail pager, for example?
Voicemail pager. I have a cell phone.
Do you give your cell phone number out?
I do and I don't. My cell phone... I live in Rockville, but out towards Potomac, and they don't work. My cell phone, nothing works. None of the services really work well in my house. That's because of the towers out there. That's probably a lack of towers. So I don't give it out as much because it won't necessarily ring if it's in my house. Mm-hmm. A lot of loan officers at your level, they don't give their cell phone out. They rather get it on a voicemail pager. Seems to give them a little more control over the process where that... Well, it gives you control over who's calling you, because if you're meeting with a customer, I don't like when my cell phone rings. If my pager goes off, it's on vibrate, and I can silence it pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. When my cell phone rings, it's much more, and to me, disturbing if I'm with a customer. Right, exactly. And I will usually look at it because I think there might be something wrong at home, so... he's one of the few people who actually calls me on it, for the office, so... For the most part, some of my realtors have it, but know that if I don't pick it up, to page me, or they'll just call me back on it if I've told them, call me back on the cell phone, I'll be out. Right, exactly. If I'm in D.C., it's fine, but if I'm out towards my house at all, it doesn't work. Well, look, I think we have to kind of end at this point. We're running out of time, and I try to keep it within a certain allocated time so as not to take up your whole day. I want to thank you very much, Renee, for taking the time to talk to our audience, and wish you the best of luck. Thank you. Okay.